Picture this. You're standing on the surface of an alien world, breathing air that doesn't belong to Earth, watching two suns set over a landscape that humanity has spent centuries transforming from a lifeless rock into a thriving paradise. The soil beneath your feet was once poisonous. The atmosphere above your head was once toxic. But now it's home to millions of people who will never see the blue skies of Earth. This isn't science fiction anymore. This is the future we're racing toward as our home planet faces mounting challenges and our species looks to the stars for answers. But here's the thing that'll blow your mind. We're not just talking about finding habitable worlds out there. We're talking about making them habitable, taking dead, hostile planets and turning them into places where human civilization can flourish for thousands of years. The question isn't whether we'll need to do this. The question is how we'll pull off the most ambitious engineering project in human history. And trust me, by the end of this journey, you'll see that the techniques we're developing right now could reshape not just distant worlds, but our understanding of what it means to be human in the cosmos. Now, I know what you're thinking. Making an entire planet habitable? That sounds impossible. But here's what's crazy. We're already doing it. Right now, on Earth, we're accidentally terraforming our own planet. We're changing atmospheric composition, altering weather patterns, and reshaping entire ecosystems. The difference is, we're doing it chaotically, without a plan. But what if we could harness that same power and use it intentionally on worlds that desperately need it? Before we dive into the mind-bending techniques that could transform alien worlds, we need to understand what we're up against. Because every exoplanet that we've discovered so far, every single one, wants to kill you in creative and horrifying ways. Take Proxima Centauri b, our nearest exoplanetary neighbor. It's tidally locked, which means one side faces its star in eternal blazing heat, while the other side freezes in perpetual darkness. The temperature difference? We're talking about 400 degrees Celsius between the day and night sides. That's hot enough to melt zinc on one side, and cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide on the other. And that's just the beginning of its problems. The star it orbits, Proxima Centauri, is a red dwarf that throws violent tantrums. It regularly blasts the planet with solar flares that carry thousands of times more energy than anything our sun produces. These aren't gentle warm rays. These are sterilizing bursts of radiation that would strip away any atmosphere and cook any life forms that dared to exist on the surface. Then there's the TRAPPIST-1 system, which sounds like paradise until you dig deeper. 7 Earth-sized planets orbiting a cool red star. But here's the catch. They're all tidally locked too, and they're so close to their star that they experience tidal forces that would literally tear apart any moons they might have had. The gravitational stress on these worlds is so intense that their surfaces are probably in constant geological upheaval. But wait, it gets worse. Most exoplanets we've found exist in conditions so extreme they make Mars look like a tropical vacation. We've got planets where it rains molten rock, worlds where the atmospheric pressure would crush you instantly, places where the air is made of vaporized metals and the surface temperature exceeds 2000 degrees Celsius. HD 189733b is a beautiful blue planet that looks almost Earth-like from space. Except the blue color comes from glass particles in the atmosphere. Glass particles that travel at 7,000 kilometers per hour in sideways storms. It literally rains glass horizontally on this world, driven by winds that make the worst hurricanes on Earth look like gentle breezes. So yeah, when we talk about making exoplanets habitable, we're not talking about minor renovations. We're talking about complete planetary makeovers that would make the most ambitious engineering projects on Earth look like weekend DIY jobs. But here's where it gets interesting. Despite these overwhelming challenges, scientists and engineers aren't giving up. They're developing techniques that could, theoretically, transform these hellish worlds into places where humans could not just survive, but thrive. And some of these techniques are so brilliant, so elegantly simple, that they'll change how you think about what's possible. The first approach is atmospheric engineering, and it starts with a simple but profound realization. Every breath you take right now exists because of the most successful terraforming project in Earth's history. 3 billion years ago, our planet's atmosphere was toxic to most life forms we know today. It was filled with methane, carbon dioxide, and barely any oxygen. But then something incredible happened. Cyanobacteria, tiny microscopic organisms, began producing oxygen as a waste product of photosynthesis. Over hundreds of millions of years, they completely transformed our planet's atmosphere, creating the oxygen-rich environment that allows complex life to exist. They terraformed Earth, and now we're learning how to do the same thing, but faster and more deliberately. The key is understanding that atmospheres aren't static. They're dynamic systems that can be influenced, manipulated, and completely restructured if you know what you're doing. On Venus, for example, the problem isn't that the planet is too close to the Sunday. The problem is its runaway greenhouse effect. The atmosphere is 96% carbon dioxide, and so thick that the surface pressure is 90 times greater than Earth's pressure. It's like being 900 meters underwater, constantly. But what if we could change that? What if we could remove that excess carbon dioxide and replace it with something more breathable? The techniques being developed are fascinating. We could introduce specially engineered algae that consume carbon dioxide at an accelerated rate. We could deploy atmospheric processors, massive machines that chemically convert the existing gases into something more suitable for human life. Or, and this is where it gets really wild, we could use what's called aerial seeding. We'd release billions of microscopic machines into the atmosphere, each one designed to break down harmful gases and produce beneficial ones. Over decades, these machines would gradually transform the entire atmospheric composition of the planet. The second approach is thermal regulation, and this is where we tackle those extreme temperature variations that make most exoplanets uninhabitable. Remember Proxima Centauri b, with its 400-degree temperature difference between day and night sides? We could fix that. The solution involves creating massive atmospheric circulation systems. Think of it as planetary air conditioning, but on a scale that's almost impossible to comprehend. We'd establish temperature transfer stations at strategic locations around the planet. These stations would capture heat from the day side and transport it to the night side through a network of atmospheric channels. But that's just the beginning. We could also deploy orbital mirrors, massive reflective surfaces positioned in space to redirect sunlight to the colder regions of the planet. Or we could use orbital shades to block excess heat from reaching the hotter regions. We're talking about engineering projects that span entire solar systems, requiring coordination between ground-based installations and space-based infrastructure. The third approach, and this one will blow your mind, is gravitational modification. Some exoplanets have gravity that's too strong or too weak for human comfort. Too strong, and you'd be crushed under your own weight. Too weak, and your bones would deteriorate, your muscles would atrophy, and your cardiovascular system would fail. But gravity isn't fixed. It's a function of mass and distance, and while we can't easily change a planet's mass, we can change how that mass is distributed. By strategically removing or adding material to different parts of the planet, we could actually alter its gravitational field in specific regions. This isn't just theoretical. We could hollow out sections of particularly dense planets and use that material to build orbital habitats. Or we could add mass to low-gravity worlds by capturing asteroids and carefully crashing them into specific locations. Each impact would be precisely calculated to increase the planet's overall mass while creating useful minerals and materials for construction. Now, here's where things get really exciting. All of these techniques, atmospheric engineering, thermal regulation, gravitational modification, they're not just useful for exoplanets. They're techniques we might need right here on Earth as our climate continues to change. The same atmospheric processes we'd use on Venus could help us remove excess carbon dioxide from our own atmosphere. The thermal regulation systems we deploy on tidally locked worlds could help us manage heat distribution in our changing climate. We're not just learning how to terraform other worlds, we're learning how to maintain and improve our own. And that's just the beginning of what's possible when we start thinking about planets as dynamic, changeable systems rather than fixed environments we have to adapt to. But there's something else happening here, something that goes beyond the technical challenges and engineering solutions. When we talk about making exoplanets habitable, we're really talking about expanding the very definition of what it means to be human. We're talking about becoming a species that doesn't just live on planets, but shapes them according to our needs and vision. And that raises questions that go far beyond engineering and science. What right do we have to reshape entire worlds? What happens when we encounter planets that already have life, even if it's just microbial? How do we balance our need for new homes with respect for existing ecosystems? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're practical challenges we'll face as we develop the technology to transform worlds, because the power to terraform planets is also the power to destroy them. The same techniques that could create paradise could also create hell if they're used incorrectly or irresponsibly. But here's what nobody talks about when they discuss terraforming: the timeline. We're not talking about decades or even centuries. We're talking about projects that could take thousands of years to complete, projects that would span dozens of human generations. And that creates challenges that go way beyond engineering. How do you maintain consistency of vision across 1,000 years? How do you ensure that the people who finish the project remember why it was started in the first place? We're talking about the longest-term planning humanity has ever attempted, and we've never been particularly good at thinking beyond the next few decades. This is where the fourth approach comes in, and it's the most ambitious one yet: biological adaptation. Instead of changing the planet to suit us, what if we changed ourselves to suit the planet? What if we could modify human biology to thrive in environments that would kill us today? Now, before you start thinking about science fiction mutations and losing our humanity, hear me out. We're already doing this, just very slowly through natural selection. Tibetan people have evolved to thrive at high altitudes where most humans would suffer from altitude sickness. Inuit populations have genetic adaptations that help them process high-fat diets and survive in extreme cold. Humans are incredibly adaptable, but evolution takes tens of thousands of years. What if we could speed that up? What if we could deliberately enhance human physiology to handle different atmospheric compositions, gravity levels, and radiation exposure? We're talking about modifications that could allow humans to breathe thinner atmospheres, process different gas mixtures, and resist radiation damage. The techniques already exist in primitive forms. Gene therapy can already modify human cells to treat genetic diseases. CRISPR technology allows us to edit DNA with unprecedented precision. Researchers are working on ways to enhance human resistance to radiation, to improve oxygen efficiency, to strengthen bones and muscles for different gravity environments. But here's the really wild part. These modifications wouldn't just help us survive on other worlds, they could help us survive the changing conditions on Earth. Enhanced radiation resistance could protect us from increased UV exposure as our ozone layer changes. Improved efficiency in processing different atmospheric compositions could help us adapt to changing air quality. Stronger bones and muscles could help us maintain health as we spend more time in low-gravity environments, like space stations. We're not just talking about colonizing other worlds anymore. We're talking about evolving into something more than human, something better adapted to the realities of life in space and on hostile planets. The fifth approach takes us into territory that sounds like pure fantasy, but is grounded in solid physics. Planetary engineering on a scale that would make terraforming look like gardening. We're talking about actually moving planets. Think about it. Many exoplanets are in the wrong place. They're too close to their stars, too far away, or in unstable orbits that make them uninhabitable. But orbits aren't permanent. With enough energy and the right technology, we could actually move planets to more suitable locations. The technique is called stellar engineering, and it involves using the star itself as an energy source to power massive planetary relocation projects. We could build Dyson swarms, networks of solar collectors that capture a significant fraction of a star's energy output. That energy could then power enormous engines attached to planets, gradually shifting their orbits over thousands of years. Or we could use gravitational assists on a massive scale. By carefully orchestrating the movements of asteroids, moons, and other celestial bodies, we could create gravitational slingshots that nudge planets into more habitable orbits. It's like celestial billiards, but with planets as the balls and careful physics, calculations as the cue stick. But here's where it gets even more incredible. We wouldn't just be moving planets, we could be building them from scratch. There's enough material in most solar systems to construct multiple Earth-sized worlds. Asteroid belts, planetary rings, even the outer layers of gas giants contain more than enough raw materials to build artificial planets with precisely the characteristics we want. These wouldn't be space stations or habitats. These would be actual planets with their own gravity, atmosphere, and surface area comparable to Earth. But unlike natural planets, they'd be designed from the ground up for human habitation, perfect gravity, ideal atmospheric composition, optimal day-night cycles, and built-in protection from radiation and cosmic hazards. The construction techniques would involve assembling these worlds layer by layer, starting with a gravitational core and building outward. We'd use techniques borrowed from planetary formation, but accelerated and controlled. Instead of waiting millions of years for natural planetary formation, we could construct these worlds over centuries using directed asteroid impacts, controlled accretion, and artificial gravitational fields. And here's the mind-bending part. Once we master these techniques, we wouldn't be limited to the materials in any single solar system. We could harvest materials from multiple star systems, transporting them using techniques like interstellar ramjets or light sails powered by stellar energy. We're talking about engineering projects that span multiple solar systems and involve moving planetary-scale amounts of material across interstellar distances. Now, let's talk about the sixth approach, because this one changes everything we think we know about habitability, consciousness transfer, and digital existence. What if the problem isn't making planets suitable for human bodies? What if the problem is that human bodies are inherently unsuitable for space colonization? Think about it. Biological bodies are fragile, resource-intensive, and poorly designed for space travel and hostile environments. We need specific atmospheric compositions, precise temperature ranges, protection from radiation, and regular supplies of food and water. We're basically walking life support systems that constantly need maintenance and resource inputs. But what if we could separate human consciousness from biological bodies? What if we could upload human minds into digital systems that could survive and thrive in environments that would instantly kill biological humans? We're talking about consciousness that could exist on worlds with surface temperatures of 500 degrees Celsius, in the vacuum of space, or in the crushing depths of gas giant atmospheres. This isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Researchers are already mapping the human brain in unprecedented detail, creating digital simulations of neural networks, and developing brain-computer interfaces that allow direct communication between minds and machines. The technology is primitive now, but it's advancing rapidly. Digital consciousness wouldn't just solve the habitability problem, it would eliminate it entirely. Digital minds could survive indefinitely without biological resources. They could exist in multiple copies as backups against death or accident. They could modify their own perception and capabilities to adapt to any environment. They could experience reality in ways that biological humans never could. And here's the really wild part. Digital consciousness could accelerate the other approaches we've talked about. Digital minds could think and work thousands of times faster than biological brains. They could coordinate massive engineering projects across multiple star systems without the delays and inefficiencies of biological decision-making. They could design and build terraforming systems, planetary construction projects, and stellar engineering installations at speeds that would be impossible for biological civilizations. But this approach raises questions that go to the heart of what it means to be human. If we upload our consciousness into machines, are we still human? If we can modify our digital minds at will, what happens to human nature? If we can exist in multiple copies, what happens to individual identity? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're practical challenges that we'll need to solve as we develop these technologies. The seventh and final approach is the one that ties everything together: ecosystem engineering. It's not enough to make a planet physically habitable. We need to make it biologically sustainable. We need to create complete ecosystems that can support not just human life, but the complex web of relationships between different species that make planets truly livable. This goes way beyond just planting trees and releasing some animals. We're talking about designing entire biospheres from the ground up. We need to understand how different species interact, how nutrients cycle through ecosystems, how energy flows from primary producers to top predators. We need to create systems that are stable, resilient, and capable of evolving and adapting over time. The challenge is that ecosystems are incredibly complex. Remove one species, and the entire system can collapse. Add the wrong species, and you can trigger ecological disasters that destroy everything you've built. We're talking about biological engineering, on a scale that makes genetic modification look simple. But the techniques are being developed. Scientists are creating detailed models of ecosystem interactions, identifying keystone species that have disproportionate impacts on ecosystem stability, and developing ways to artificially accelerate ecological succession. We're learning how to design ecosystems that are more stable and resilient than natural ones. And here's what's incredible about ecosystem engineering. Once we perfect these techniques, we won't just be able to create sustainable colonies on other worlds. We'll be able to repair and enhance ecosystems here on Earth. We could restore damaged environments, create new habitats for endangered species, and design ecosystems that are specifically adapted to changing climate conditions. All of these approaches, atmospheric engineering, thermal regulation, gravitational modification, biological adaptation, planetary construction, consciousness transfer, and ecosystem engineering, they're not separate solutions. They're different parts of a comprehensive toolkit for making any world habitable. And when we combine them, when we use all of these techniques together, we're not just talking about colonizing other planets anymore. We're talking about becoming the architects of entire worlds, the designers of new forms of life, the creators of civilizations that could persist for millions of years across multiple star systems. We're talking about humanity's transformation from a single planet species into something that could reshape the galaxy according to our vision and values. But here's the thing that nobody talks about when we discuss these world-shaping technologies: the economic reality. We're not just talking about the most ambitious engineering projects in human history. We're talking about the most expensive ones too, and that creates a problem that could kill these projects before they even begin. Think about the numbers for a moment. The International Space Station, humanity's most expensive construction project, cost about $150 billion to build. That's for a habitat that houses 6 people in low Earth orbit. Now imagine the cost of atmospheric processes that could transform an entire planet's air composition. We're talking about machines the size of cities, operating for centuries, using materials that would need to be transported across interstellar distances. The energy requirements alone are staggering. To move a planet into a different orbit, we'd need to harness energy equivalent to the total output of our sun for several years. To construct an artificial planet from asteroid materials, we'd need industrial infrastructure that dwarfs everything humanity has ever built combined. We're talking about economic investments that would require the resources of entire civilizations sustained over thousands of years. But here's where it gets interesting. The same technologies that make terraforming possible also make these massive projects economically viable. Remember those Dyson swarms we talked about for stellar engineering? They don't just provide energy for moving planets. They provide virtually unlimited energy for any project we can imagine. We're talking about energy abundance on a scale that makes current economic models completely obsolete. And asteroid mining changes everything about resource scarcity. A single metallic asteroid contains more platinum than has ever been mined on Earth. The asteroid belt in our solar system contains enough materials to build thousands of Earth-sized planets. Once we develop the technology to harvest these resources efficiently, the raw materials for terraforming projects become essentially free. This creates what economists call a post-scarcity economy. When energy and materials are abundant, the traditional constraints that limit human projects disappear. We could afford to attempt massive terraforming projects not because they're cheap, but because the concept of cost becomes meaningless when you have access to the energy output of entire stars and the material wealth of entire solar systems. But there's a catch, and it's a big one. These technologies don't just make terraforming possible, they make it necessary. Because once a civilization develops the ability to harvest stellar energy and mine asteroids on an industrial scale, staying confined to a single planet becomes not just limiting, but dangerous. Think about it from the perspective of cosmic risks. Right now, humanity is vulnerable to extinction from events that wouldn't even register on a galactic scale. A large asteroid impact, a supervolcanic eruption, even a nuclear war could end our civilization. But a species spread across multiple star systems, with the technology to build new worlds and transfer consciousness between them, becomes essentially extinction-proof. This is where terraforming stops being about colonization and starts being about survival. We're not just talking about expanding human civilization anymore. We're talking about ensuring that human consciousness, human culture, and human values persist regardless of what happens to any individual world or star system. And that brings us to the timeline problem I mentioned earlier, but with a twist. These projects aren't just long-term in human terms, they're long-term in geological terms. We're talking about engineering projects that would outlast the rise and fall of entire civilizations on Earth. But that's not necessarily a problem if we approach it correctly. Instead of thinking about these as single massive projects, we could think about them as evolutionary processes. Each generation of humans would improve and expand on the work of the previous generation, gradually transforming worlds over thousands of years. The key is building systems that are self-improving and self-sustaining, atmospheric processes that become more efficient over time, ecosystem engineering projects that evolve and adapt as they mature, construction systems that learn from each project and become more capable with each iteration. We're talking about creating technological evolution, systems that improve themselves faster than biological evolution could ever achieve. And once these systems reach a certain level of sophistication, they could accelerate the terraforming process exponentially. Imagine atmospheric processes that don't just convert gases, but design and deploy improved versions of themselves. Ecosystem engineering systems that don't just maintain biological balance, but actively design new species to fill ecological niches more effectively. Construction systems that don't just build habitats, but continuously redesign and improve them based on data from thousands of previous projects. This is where artificial intelligence becomes crucial to the terraforming process. We're talking about AI systems that could coordinate planetary transformation projects across multiple worlds simultaneously, optimizing resource allocation, predicting potential problems, and adapting strategies in real time based on changing conditions. But AI also introduces new possibilities that go beyond traditional terraforming. What if instead of modifying planets to suit humans, we could modify the concept of habitability itself? AI systems could design entirely new forms of consciousness that are specifically adapted to different planetary environments. We could have digital beings that thrive in the high radiation environment around pulsars, consciousness that exists in the plasma environments of stellar atmospheres, minds that are specifically designed to experience and appreciate the beauty of gas giant atmospheres or the crystalline formations of frozen worlds. This isn't about replacing humans. It's about expanding the definition of what human consciousness can become. We could have specialized versions of human awareness, each one designed to flourish in environments that would be deadly to our current biological forms, but all maintaining the core values, creativity, and curiosity that define human nature. And here's where the terraforming concept explodes into something much larger. We're not just talking about making individual planets habitable anymore. We're talking about making the entire galaxy habitable for consciousness in all its forms. Think about stellar engineering on the scale of entire galactic regions. We could regulate the formation of new stars, ensuring that they develop planetary systems suitable for consciousness. We could prevent or mitigate supernova explosions that would sterilize nearby systems. We could even influence the evolution of the galaxy itself, guiding it toward configurations that maximize the potential for complex consciousness to emerge and flourish. This level of engineering would require cooperation between civilizations across multiple star systems, coordinated over millions of years. We're talking about projects that would make terraforming individual planets look like weekend gardening projects. But it's not impossible. The same exponential improvements in technology that make terraforming feasible also make galactic engineering achievable. Once you can build self-improving systems that operate on planetary scales, scaling up to galactic scales becomes a matter of coordination rather than capability. And this is where we encounter the most profound question of all. If we develop the ability to engineer planets, star systems, and eventually entire galactic regions, what are our responsibilities to other forms of consciousness that might emerge? We've been assuming that we're alone in the universe, or at least that we're the first to develop these capabilities. But what if we're not? What if there are other civilizations out there, either more or less advanced than us, trying to solve the same problems we're facing? The technologies we develop for terraforming could just as easily be used for destruction. Atmospheric processes could poison planets instead of making them habitable. Stellar engineering could destabilize star systems instead of improving them. The power to create worlds is also the power to destroy them. This means that as we develop these capabilities, we also need to develop new forms of ethics, diplomacy, and cooperation that can operate on galactic scales and cosmic timelines. We need frameworks for sharing resources, coordinating projects, and resolving conflicts between civilizations that might have completely different concepts of what makes a world worth living on. But here's what gives me hope about this challenge. The same technologies that make us powerful enough to reshape worlds also make us capable enough to handle that power responsibly. AI systems that can coordinate planetary engineering projects can also model the long-term consequences of our actions. Communication systems that can manage interstellar construction projects can also facilitate diplomacy between different civilizations. And consciousness transfer technology means that we could literally experience what it's like to be different forms of life, to understand perspectives that are completely alien to our current biological existence. We could develop empathy not just for other humans, but for any form of consciousness we encounter in the universe. This is the ultimate goal of making exoplanets habitable. It's not just about expanding human civilization into space. It's about expanding consciousness itself, creating a universe where awareness, creativity, and beauty can flourish in forms we can barely imagine today. We're standing at the beginning of the most important transition in the history of life on Earth. The transition from a single planet species confined to one small world to a galaxy-spanning civilization capable of creating and nurturing consciousness on scales that dwarf anything in our current experience. The techniques exist. The physics is sound. The only question is whether we have the wisdom, cooperation, and long-term thinking necessary to use these capabilities to create something beautiful instead of something terrible. And that question will be answered not by scientists or engineers or politicians, but by all of us as we decide what kind of future we want to build among the stars. Because in the end, the most important thing we'll terraform isn't any particular planet. It's ourselves, transforming from a species that adapts to environments into one that creates them, guided by the values and vision we choose to carry with us into the cosmic dark. The universe is waiting for us to decide what we want to become. And once we make that choice, there's literally nothing we can't build. But before we get too carried away dreaming about galactic civilizations, let's bring this back to reality. Because right now, today, we have people working on the fundamental technologies that could make all of this possible, and some of their breakthroughs are happening faster than anyone expected. At MIT, researchers are developing atmospheric processors that could work on Mars within our lifetime. These aren't the massive planet-sized machines we talked about earlier. These are compact, efficient systems that could begin transforming small areas of the Martian atmosphere using resources that are already there. They're called MOXIE units, and they're already being tested on Mars right now through the Perseverance rover. But here's what's incredible about these early atmospheric processors. They're not just proof of concept anymore, they're actually working. MOXIE has successfully converted Martian carbon dioxide into oxygen multiple times, proving that we can literally breathe air that didn't exist until we made it from the atmosphere of another world. And that's just the beginning. The next generation of atmospheric processors being designed could scale up this process by factors of thousands. Instead of producing grams of oxygen per hour, we're talking about systems that could produce tons. Instead of converting tiny pockets of atmosphere, we're talking about systems that could gradually transform the air composition across entire regions of a planet. The timeline for Mars atmospheric modification has shifted from centuries to decades. Some researchers now believe we could create breathable air pockets on Mars within 50 years. Not terraforming the entire planet, but creating localized zones where humans could walk around without pressure suits. Think of them as atmospheric bubbles, expanding outward from our initial settlements until they eventually merge into larger habitable regions. Meanwhile, in laboratories across the world, scientists are solving the biological adaptation puzzle piece by piece. Gene therapy trials are already showing that we can modify human cells to resist radiation damage. Researchers at Harvard have successfully enhanced human muscle cells to function more efficiently in low-gravity environments. Teams in Japan are working on modifications that would allow human lungs to process different atmospheric compositions. These aren't theoretical future technologies. These are experiments happening right now, with real results that are being published in scientific journals. We're not decades away from the first genetically enhanced space colonists. We're years away. But the most exciting breakthrough isn't happening in any single laboratory. It's happening in the intersection between artificial intelligence and planetary science. AI systems are now capable of modeling planetary atmospheres with unprecedented accuracy, predicting exactly what would happen if we introduced specific modifications to a world's environment. These models aren't just theoretical exercises. They're detailed simulations that can predict the outcome of terraforming interventions down to regional weather patterns and seasonal variations. We can now test terraforming strategies digitally before we implement them physically, dramatically reducing the risk of catastrophic failures. And here's where it gets really interesting. These AI systems are starting to design terraforming strategies that human scientists never would have thought of. They're finding elegant solutions that combine multiple approaches in ways that amplify each other's effectiveness. For example, AI models recently discovered that on tidally locked planets like Proxima Centauri b, you don't need to heat the entire night side to make it habitable. You just need to create atmospheric circulation patterns that transport heat more efficiently. And you can do that by strategically placing atmospheric heating stations at specific locations that create thermal updrafts, which then drive circulation patterns that distribute heat across the entire planet. The AI didn't just figure out where to put these stations. It designed the optimal heating patterns, calculated the precise energy requirements, and even identified the most efficient materials to use for construction. What would have taken human scientists years to figure out, the AI solved in hours. But here's the most mind-blowing part. These AI systems are now designing terraforming approaches that are specifically optimized for the available resources in each target solar system. Instead of having one universal terraforming strategy, we're developing customized approaches that make use of whatever materials and energy sources are available locally. For the TRAPPIST-1 system, AI models have designed a terraforming strategy that uses the gravitational interactions between the 7 planets to power atmospheric circulation systems. The tidal forces that we thought were a problem become the energy source for the solution. For systems with asteroid belts, the AI designs terraforming approaches that use asteroid mining operations to provide both the materials for atmospheric processes and the energy for thermal regulation systems. The mining operations aren't separate from the terraforming process. They're integrated into it, making the entire project more efficient and cost-effective. And for systems near neutron stars or other high-energy cosmic objects, the AI has figured out how to use that extreme radiation as a power source for planetary engineering projects. What we thought were the most hostile environments in the universe become opportunities for the most ambitious terraforming projects. This is where we start to see the real potential of combining human creativity with artificial intelligence. Humans provide the vision, the values, and the goals. AI provides the computational power to turn those visions into detailed, implementable plans. But there's something else happening that nobody saw coming. As these AI systems get better at modeling planetary environments, they're starting to discover natural terraforming processes that we never knew existed. They've identified bacterial ecosystems on Earth that naturally modify atmospheric composition in ways that could be scaled up for planetary engineering. They've found chemical processes in volcanic environments that could be replicated artificially to transform planetary atmospheres. They've even discovered that certain types of stellar radiation could be used to trigger beneficial chemical reactions in planetary atmospheres, essentially using stars as tools for terraforming. This means we're not just developing artificial terraforming technologies, we're discovering natural terraforming processes that we can enhance and direct. We're learning that the universe is already full of planetary transformation systems. We just need to understand them and learn how to use them. And that leads us to one of the most exciting recent discoveries. AI analysis of exoplanet data has identified several worlds that appear to be undergoing natural terraforming processes right now. These planets show atmospheric compositions that are changing over time in ways that suggest they're becoming more habitable, not less. The most promising candidate is CO₂-18b, which we mentioned earlier. Recent spectroscopic analysis shows that its atmosphere contains dimethyl sulfide, a compound that on Earth is only produced by living organisms. But here's what's really interesting. The concentrations of this compound in CO₂-18b's atmosphere are increasing over time. This suggests that whatever is producing dimethyl sulfide on CO₂-18b is not just alive, but actively expanding. We might be looking at a planet that's in the middle of its own biological terraforming process, driven by native life forms that are transforming their world to make it more habitable. If this is true, it changes everything about our approach to terraforming. Instead of starting from scratch on dead worlds, we might be able to find planets that are already in the process of becoming habitable and simply accelerate or guide those natural processes. This is called assisted terraforming, and it's becoming our vision of habitability on alien worlds. We cool the focus of intense research interest. Instead of imposed work with existing natural processes to achieve habitability faster and more sustainably. The techniques for assisted terraforming are radically different from traditional terraforming approaches. Instead of atmospheric processes that completely replace a planet's air, we'd use biological enhancers that accelerate existing atmospheric modification processes. Instead of thermal regulation systems that impose enhancers that amplify natural heat distribution, artificial temperature patterns, we'd use circulation systems. And instead of ecosystem engineering that creates entirely artificial biological systems, we'd use evolutionary acceleration techniques that help existing life-terraforming races, ethical forms adapt more quickly to changing planetary conditions, but assist questions that pure terraforming doesn't. If we find a world with existing life that's in, do we have the right to interfere the process of terraforming itself with that process? What if our assistance changes the outcome in ways that harm the native life forms? These aren't just philosophical questions. They're practical challenges that we're going to face as we identify more potentially habitable worlds and develop the technology to reach them. We need frameworks for deciding when intervention is appropriate and when it's not. And we need those frameworks soon, because the technology for interstellar travel is advancing faster than most people realize. Breakthrough Starshot, a project funded by some of the world's wealthiest individuals, is already testing light sail technology that could send small probes to nearby star systems within our lifetime. These probes won't be able to carry terraforming equipment, but they could carry something even more valuable: information. They could provide detailed analysis of exoplanet atmospheres, surface conditions, and potential signs of life. They could identify the best candidates for terraforming and provide the data we need to design effective terraforming strategies before we ever leave Earth. But here's where it gets really exciting. The same light sail technology that could send probes to other star systems could eventually be scaled up to send larger payloads. We're talking about unmanned terraforming missions that could begin transforming exoplanets decades before humans ever arrive. Imagine this. We identify a promising exoplanet, say 20 light-years away. We design a comprehensive terraforming strategy using AI models based on probe data. Then we launch a fleet of light sail-powered terraforming systems that arrive at the target planet and begin the transformation process. By the time human colonists make the journey, which might take several decades even with advanced propulsion systems, they'd arrive at a world that's already partially terraformed and ready for immediate settlement. This is called pre-terraforming, and it could solve one of the biggest challenges of interstellar colonization. Instead of arriving at hostile worlds with limited supplies and hoping to survive long enough to begin terraforming, colonists would arrive at worlds that are already on their way to becoming habitable. The pre-terraforming systems wouldn't just modify atmospheres and regulate temperatures, they'd establish the basic infrastructure for human settlement. Atmospheric processing stations, thermal regulation networks, communication systems, even basic manufacturing facilities that could produce tools and materials from local resources. But the most ambitious pre-terraforming concept goes even further. Advanced manufacturing systems could construct entire cities before humans arrive. These wouldn't be simple shelters or basic habitats. They'd be complete urban environments designed specifically for the conditions on each target world. The construction process would be completely automated, using materials harvested from the planet's surface and orbital environment. AI systems would optimize city layouts for local weather patterns, geological conditions, and resource availability. By the time colonists arrive, they'd have ready-made civilizations waiting for them. This might sound like science fiction, but the fundamental technologies already exist. We have automated manufacturing systems that can build complex structures from raw materials. We have AI systems that can design optimal layouts for different environmental conditions. We have robotic systems that can operate autonomously for years without human intervention. The challenge isn't developing new technologies. It's scaling up existing technologies and integrating them into systems that can operate reliably across interstellar distances and timescales. But there's another approach that could be even more effective. Instead of sending physical terraforming systems to other worlds, what if we could send information patterns that could reconstruct those systems from local materials? This is called molecular manufacturing, and it's based on the idea that any physical object can be described as an information pattern that specifies how atoms should be arranged. If you can transmit that information pattern and have systems on the receiving end that can arrange atoms according to those specifications, you can essentially teleport any object across any distance. For terraforming, this would mean that we could design atmospheric processors, thermal regulation systems, and ecosystem engineering tools on Earth, then transmit the blueprints to other star systems where automated manufacturing systems would build them from local materials. The advantages are enormous. Instead of having to transport massive terraforming equipment across interstellar distances, we'd only need to transport information which can travel at the speed of light. Instead of being limited by the payload capacity of our spacecraft, we'd be limited only by our ability to design effective terraforming systems. And here's the really wild part. Molecular manufacturing systems wouldn't just build terraforming equipment, they could build copies of themselves, creating self-replicating manufacturing networks that could spread across entire solar systems. These self-replicating systems could transform not just individual planets, but entire solar systems. They could harvest materials from asteroid belts to build Dyson swarms around stars. They could construct artificial planets in optimal orbital locations. They could even modify stars themselves to optimize their energy output for supporting life. We're talking about technology that could turn any solar system into a paradise specifically designed for conscious life. And once these systems are established in one location, they could send copies of themselves to other star systems, spreading habitability across the galaxy at close to the speed of light. This is where terraforming transcends planetary engineering and becomes galactic engineering. We're not just talking about making individual worlds habitable anymore. We're talking about making the entire galaxy into a place where consciousness can flourish in every possible form. But with great power comes great responsibility, and the power to reshape entire galaxies is the greatest power any civilization could ever possess. The question isn't whether we'll develop these capabilities. The question is whether we'll be wise enough to use them well. Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. Once we become the kind of species that can terraform worlds, construct solar systems, and engineer galaxies, we also become responsible for every form of consciousness that emerges in the universe. That's a responsibility that goes far beyond anything humanity has ever faced before. And it's a responsibility we need to start preparing for now, while we still have time to think carefully about what kind of galactic civilization we want to become. The future of consciousness in the universe might depend on the choices we make in the next few decades about how to develop and deploy these world-shaping technologies. And that's not science fiction. That's the reality we're racing toward, whether we're ready for it or not. The question that keeps me awake at night isn't whether we can terraform worlds, it's whether we should. Because here's what nobody talks about when we discuss reshaping planets. We're not just engineering environments, we're engineering evolution itself. Think about what happens when you take a species that evolved over millions of years to thrive in one specific environment and suddenly drop it into a completely different world. Even if that world is technically habitable, even if it has breathable air and comfortable temperatures, the biological stress of adaptation could fundamentally alter what it means to be human. And we're seeing early signs of this already. Astronauts who spend extended periods in space return with changes that go far beyond muscle atrophy and bone loss. Their brains literally rewire themselves to process spatial information differently. Their cardiovascular systems adapt to function without gravity. Some of these changes persist for years after returning to Earth. Now imagine those adaptations happening over generations on a terraformed world with slightly different gravity, atmospheric pressure, or radiation levels. After a few hundred years, the humans living on that world might be genetically and physiologically distinct from Earth humans. We wouldn't just be colonizing space, we'd be speciating across the galaxy. This brings us to something I call the consciousness fragmentation problem. As human populations spread across multiple worlds, each adapted to different environments, will we still be the same species? Will we still share the same values, the same way of thinking about reality, the same fundamental human nature? The answer might be no, and that might not be a bad thing. Consider this possibility. What if the greatest gift we could give to consciousness isn't preserving humanity as it currently exists, but enabling it to evolve into forms that are perfectly adapted to thrive in any environment the universe can offer? What if instead of one human species struggling to survive on hostile worlds, we could have dozens of human subspecies, each one exquisitely designed for their specific planetary home? This is called directed speciation, and it's already happening naturally in isolated human populations. Tibetan highlanders have evolved distinct genetic adaptations for high-altitude living in just a few thousand years. Inuit populations have genetic modifications that help them process high-fat diets and survive extreme cold. These aren't just cultural adaptations, they're biological ones. But we could accelerate this process dramatically. Instead of waiting thousands of years for natural selection to optimize human biology for different environments, we could use genetic engineering to create these adaptations intentionally. We could design human variants specifically for high-gravity worlds, low-oxygen atmospheres, or high-radiation environments. Each variant would still be fundamentally human in terms of consciousness, creativity, and values, but they'd be biologically optimized for their specific world in ways that would make them healthier, happier, and more capable than unmodified humans trying to survive in those same environments. This isn't about creating superior and inferior humans. It's about creating different humans, each one perfect for their chosen home among the stars. And here's the beautiful part. These different human subspecies could still interbreed and share genetic material, maintaining the biological unity of our species, while allowing for incredible diversity in how that species expresses itself. But genetic adaptation is just the beginning. The real revolution comes when we start thinking about cognitive adaptation. Different environments might favor different types of thinking, different ways of processing information, different approaches to problem solving. On a world with extreme weather variations, humans might evolve enhanced pattern recognition abilities to predict dangerous storms. On a world with complex three-dimensional terrain, spatial reasoning might become dramatically more sophisticated. On a world with limited resources, cooperative social instincts might become more pronounced. We could accelerate these cognitive adaptations just like we could accelerate physical ones. Brain-computer interfaces could enhance specific cognitive abilities for different environments. Genetic modifications could alter neurotransmitter production to optimize thinking patterns for specific challenges. The result would be human subspecies that don't just survive in different environments, but think differently, perceive reality differently, and approach problems with cognitive tools specifically designed for their world's unique challenges. And this is where terraforming becomes something much more profound than engineering. It becomes a collaborative process between human consciousness and planetary environments, where both are transformed in ways that create something entirely new and beautiful. Instead of imposing Earth-like conditions on alien worlds, we could create hybrid environments that combine the best aspects of both worlds. Instead of forcing human biology to adapt to hostile environments, we could modify both the environment and human biology to create perfect symbiosis. But here's where the timeline problem becomes even more complex. These adaptations wouldn't just take generations to complete, they'd be irreversible. Once a human population has been genetically and cognitively adapted for a specific world, returning to Earth or moving to a different world would be extremely difficult. We'd be creating permanent human subspecies, each one locked into their chosen world, not by technology or politics, but by biology itself. The decision to terraform and colonize a world wouldn't just be about where to live, it would be about what kind of human to become. This raises ethical questions that make the challenges of terraforming look simple. Who gets to decide which genetic and cognitive modifications are appropriate for each world? How do we ensure that these modifications enhance human potential rather than limiting it? What happens if we make mistakes that can't be undone? But there's another possibility that could sidestep these ethical dilemmas entirely. Instead of permanently modifying human biology for different worlds, what if we could develop temporary adaptations that could be activated or deactivated as needed? This is called dynamic adaptation, and it's based on technologies that are already being developed for medical applications. Gene therapy systems that can turn specific genes on or off in response to environmental conditions. Nanotechnology that can modify biological functions in real time. Brain-computer interfaces that can enhance or suppress different cognitive abilities as circumstances require. With dynamic adaptation, humans could maintain their baseline Earth biology while temporarily activating the modifications needed for specific environments. A colonist traveling from a high-gravity world to a low-gravity space station could adjust their bone density and muscle mass for the journey. Someone moving from a high-oxygen world to a low-oxygen world could modify their lung efficiency and blood chemistry. The same person could live comfortably on multiple worlds throughout their lifetime, adapting their biology as needed while maintaining their core human identity. This would allow for much more flexibility in how we colonize space, enabling humans to move freely between different environments without being locked into any single adaptation. But dynamic adaptation also opens up possibilities that go far beyond simple environmental adjustments. If we can modify human biology temporarily and reversibly, we could also enhance human capabilities in ways that have nothing to do with planetary environments. Enhanced strength for construction work, improved radiation resistance for space travel, accelerated healing for dangerous expeditions, enhanced sensory perception for scientific research, improved memory and processing speed for complex problem solving. These wouldn't be permanent changes that alter human nature. They'd be temporary enhancements that expand human potential while preserving human identity. We could become more than human when we need to, then return to baseline humanity when we choose to. And here's where it gets really interesting. Dynamic adaptation could make terraforming unnecessary for many worlds. Instead of spending centuries modifying a planet's environment to suit human biology, we could modify human biology to suit the planet's environment in a matter of hours or days. This doesn't mean abandoning terraforming entirely. There are still many worlds that would be completely uninhabitable even with biological modifications. But it does mean that we could colonize a much wider range of worlds much more quickly and with far less environmental disruption. We could establish human settlements on worlds that are too cold, too hot, too dry, too wet, or too radioactive for baseline humans. We could live comfortably in environments that would kill unmodified humans in minutes. We could expand human civilization to virtually every world in the galaxy, regardless of their environmental conditions. But this brings us back to the consciousness fragmentation problem, except now it's even more complex. If humans can modify their biology and cognitive abilities at will, what happens to human identity? If someone can be temporarily enhanced for specific tasks or environments, are they still the same person? What happens to human relationships when people can fundamentally change their personalities and capabilities? These questions become even more challenging when we consider that different worlds might favor different types of consciousness entirely. A world with extreme seasonal variations might favor consciousness that can hibernate for months at a time, A world with complex underground cave systems might favor consciousness that can navigate in complete darkness using echolocation. We could develop human variants with consciousness that operates in ways completely alien to our current experience. Humans who think in 4 dimensions instead of 3. Humans whose consciousness can split into multiple parallel streams. Humans who can directly interface their minds with planetary ecosystems. Each of these variants would still be human in some fundamental sense, but they'd experience reality in ways that baseline humans couldn't even comprehend. And over time, these different forms of consciousness might diverge so far from each other that communication between them becomes difficult or impossible. This is the ultimate challenge of making exoplanets habitable. It's not just about engineering planets or biology, or even consciousness. It's about deciding what we want human consciousness to become as we spread across the galaxy. Do we want to preserve human nature as it currently exists, maintaining a single unified human species despite the challenges of living on diverse worlds? Or do we want to embrace the potential for human consciousness to evolve and diversify, creating a galaxy filled with different forms of human awareness, each one perfectly adapted to their chosen environment? There's no right answer to this question. Both paths offer incredible possibilities and profound risks, but it's a choice we need to make consciously because the technologies we develop for terraforming will inevitably shape the direction of human evolution. And we need to make this choice soon, because the window for conscious decision-making is closing. As we develop more powerful genetic engineering, nanotechnology, and artificial intelligence, the pace of change will accelerate beyond our ability to control or direct it. We're approaching what futurists call the technological singularity, a point where the rate of technological change becomes so rapid that it's impossible to predict or plan for future developments. Once we reach that point, the evolution of human consciousness will be driven by technological capabilities rather than human choices. That's why the work being done right now on terraforming technologies is so crucial. We're not just developing the tools to make other worlds habitable. We're developing the tools that will determine what humanity becomes as we spread across the universe. The decisions we make about atmospheric processes, genetic modifications, consciousness transfer, and ecosystem engineering will echo across millions of years and potentially billions of lives. We're designing not just the worlds we'll live on, but the forms of consciousness that will inhabit those worlds. This is the real reason why making exoplanets habitable matters. It's not about survival or expansion or even exploration. It's about the future of consciousness itself. We have the opportunity to shape the evolution of awareness in the universe, to ensure that the capacity for thought, creativity, beauty, and meaning continues to grow and flourish, regardless of what happens to any individual world or civilization. But that opportunity comes with a responsibility that's almost overwhelming. We're not just colonizing space. We're becoming the architects of consciousness itself, the designers of new forms of awareness that could persist for millions of years after our current civilization has been forgotten. The question isn't whether we can make exoplanets habitable. The question is whether we're wise enough to do it in ways that honor the incredible potential of consciousness while avoiding the disasters that could destroy it forever. And that question will be answered not by our technology, but by our values, not by what we can build, but by what we choose to build, not by our power to reshape worlds, but by our wisdom to reshape them well. The universe is waiting to see what we'll become, and the choices we make about terraforming in the next few decades will echo across the cosmos for millions of years to come. The technologies we're discussing aren't just theoretical anymore. They're being tested, refined, and scaled up in laboratories and research facilities around the world right now. And some of the results are absolutely mind-blowing. Take Project Moxie, which I mentioned earlier, but here's what most people don't know about it. The oxygen production rates they're achieving on Mars are already exceeding their original projections by significant margins. What started as a proof-of-concept experiment has turned into a robust, reliable system that could be scaled up to support human settlements within the next decade. But that's just the beginning. NASA's Artemis program isn't just about returning to the moon. It's about testing terraforming technologies in a real extraterrestrial environment. They're planning to establish lunar bases that will serve as proving grounds for atmospheric processing, radiation shielding, and closed-loop life support systems. The moon becomes our testing laboratory for Mars. Mars becomes our testing laboratory for exoplanets. Each world teaches us lessons that prepare us for the next, more challenging environment. Meanwhile, private companies are developing technologies that could revolutionize how we approach planetary engineering. SpaceX's Starship isn't just designed to transport people to Mars. It's designed to transport the industrial infrastructure needed to begin large-scale terraforming operations. We're talking about cargo ships that could deliver atmospheric processors the size of buildings, thermal regulation systems that span continents, and manufacturing facilities that could produce terraforming equipment from Martian resources. The logistics of planetary transformation are being solved right now, not in some distant future. And here's something that'll blow your mind. The cost projections for these technologies are dropping faster than anyone predicted. What would have cost trillions of dollars using traditional approaches could be accomplished for billions using the new automated manufacturing and self-replicating systems being developed. Remember those molecular manufacturing concepts I mentioned? Companies like Relativity Space are already using 3D printing to manufacture entire rockets from raw materials. It's not a huge leap to imagine similar systems that could manufacture terraforming equipment from asteroid materials or planetary surface resources. But the real game changer is happening in the field of synthetic biology. Scientists are now engineering organisms that could serve as living terraforming systems. Bacteria that consume carbon dioxide and produce oxygen at accelerated rates. Algae that can survive in extreme radiation and begin the process of atmospheric conversion. Fungi that can break down toxic soil compounds and create fertile ground for food production. These aren't just laboratory curiosities. They're robust, reliable biological systems that could be deployed on other worlds to begin terraforming processes decades before human colonists arrive. We're talking about seeding planets with life that's specifically designed to make those worlds more habitable for future human inhabitants. And here's where it gets really exciting. These biological terraforming systems don't just modify environments passively. They actively respond to changing conditions, adapting their behavior to optimize the terraforming process. They're like living, breathing, planetary engineering systems that get smarter and more effective over time. But there's something even more revolutionary happening in the intersection between biology and technology. Researchers are developing hybrid biotechnological systems that combine the adaptability of living organisms with the precision and power of engineered machines. Imagine atmospheric processes that use engineered bacteria to break down harmful gases, then use nanotechnology to recombine those molecules into breathable air. Or thermal regulation systems that use modified plants to capture and redirect solar energy, augmented by technological systems that can store and distribute that energy across entire continents. So here we are, standing at the edge of the most profound transformation in human history. We've journeyed through atmospheric processes that could breathe life into dead worlds, explored technologies that could move entire planets, and glimpsed futures where consciousness itself evolves beyond our current imagination. The question isn't whether we can terraform exoplanets anymore. The question is what we'll choose to become in the process. Because when we reshape worlds, we inevitably reshape ourselves. And that choice, that fundamental decision about the future of human consciousness among the stars, starts with the work being done right now in laboratories and research facilities around the globe. The universe is waiting. What will we build?